was growing up, I didn't understand why the sky was blue. I didn't understand how soap could smell so good and taste so bad. I didn't understand how slippery ice could be, and I got a concussion finding out. Like most, I didn't understand a lot of things. And like most, I understood eventually through trial and error and occasionally painful experience. However, there was one thing that was particularly, extremely difficult for me to understand. I couldn't understand people. It was like there was a constant wall between me and others, an impenetrable barrier that kept me isolated from everyone else. This barrier only existed in my head. All the same, it was a barrier that kept me in and others out. It wasn't until I was turning 7 that a neuropsychologist gave this barrier a name, autism. In hindsight, the signs were there. You see, in preschool, when I got mad, I would do what any other frustrated toddler would do. I'd throw a tantrum, except I'd take it a step further and literally bang my head against the wall. This was perhaps the first sign that I was not normal, that I was different. Come kindergarten, there was another major clue. I was completely, totally oblivious to my surroundings. I would, step on people's toes, stumble into desks, stumble into people, and overall I was just really clumsy. And I never apologized for any of it. Someone had to pull me aside and explain to me step by step what I did wrong. And then I would get it, I'd understand. But I lacked the ability to figure out any of it myself. It's akin to neurological blindness, the inability to see social boundaries like everyone else could. So, I naturally wouldn't see anything wrong with stepping on someone's toes and walking away without saying anything, when all of you know that that is clearly a social slip-up. Researchers have taken to calling this trait mind blindness. There's a common misconception that people with autism completely lack empathy, cold, stone-hearted people. Obviously not true, because what mind blindness means is that we lack the social insight to put ourselves into other people's shoes. We cannot visualize anything we cannot naturally visualize anything from the other perspective. It essentially boils down to, if it doesn't bother me right now, then it won't bother them. So that clearly leads to some difficulties, and it sometimes leads to people with autism being seen as overly blunt or insensitive. Later on, I'll learn that the specific type of autism I had was known as Asperger's syndrome. Essentially, it's a milder form of autism characterized by repetitive behavior, lack of social awareness, difficulties communicating verbally and non-verbally, and difficulties expressing emotions properly. After my diagnosis, one could assume that there must have been some cure therapy, right? In reality, my behavior at first grade and beyond worsened exponentially. I would throw gigantic fits over things that would seem inconsequential to other people. I have this really vivid memory of throwing up a gigantic fuss because I couldn't tear out a piece of notebook paper without chewing the paper itself. It's really a small thing, but to me those small things in an instant become my entire world. And the tantrums I throw in response, also called meltdowns, usually follow a specific pattern. First is a trigger, a catalyst to speed things up a bit. You see, being born with autism means I naturally have less of a grasp on other people's emotions, and consequently I have less control and grasp over my own emotions. I don't have a natural way or outlet to put out all the negative emotion and frustration that gets built up into me. And so it just piles up inside until something sets off that emotional dynamite. And therefore it leads to, after the trigger comes the anger. After the trigger comes the anger, when I'm angry before tantrum, it's like an all-consuming, unstoppable rage. It feels like nothing is going right in the world. Like everything and everyone is against me. And it's an overreaction. Sure. Yeah. Next is the physical compulsion to do something. It could be, I would be tearing the place up, running around, kicking, screaming, crying, and at this point I really can't stop myself. I've gone over the deep end, so to speak. I'm feeling incredible anger and frustration at being unable to make things right. And the angrier I get, the bigger the problem seems, no matter how small it is. It could be as simple as losing a pencil, really. But the angrier I get, the bigger the problem seems, and the bigger the tantrum becomes as in response. And so it escalates. It's a vicious cycle. And this continues until I'm too worn out to continue, at which point I usually collapse to the floor. I'm so emotionally and physically drained by the experience that the entire thing is kind of hazy. I don't really remember what I did or what I felt. A tantrum is kind of like a system reboot for my emotional and psychological state. And, since I don't remember what I did or what I felt, I was doomed to repeat them. And I had these meltdowns consistently throughout the primary grades, first through third. Consequently, there was almost nobody willing to play or even talk to me. And some kids even bullied me for it, enjoying seeing me get into trouble. The teachers were perplexed. The principal took a special disliking to me. No matter what, I was always the guilty party, and my parents were also at fault for raising me to be such a tantrum brat. I suppose you could call me misunderstood, yet how can you rationalize a 7-year-old kicking chairs over a water bottle to anyone who didn't understand what autism was? I was disciplined unfairly for the reasons that I didn't understand. For social rules that everyone else seemed to get but me. Today's studies show that 1 in 68 babies are born autistic. Therefore, to be autistic without any special help or therapy is to be socially incompatible with 98.5% of the world. My troubles in and with school continued and worsened throughout 3rd grade until my parents were and I were sick of it. In 2009, we moved here. Logically speaking, my new home, was leagues ahead of my old home. It had better neighborhood, bigger house, swimming pool. The school too offered better therapy and social services. Yet at first it was horrible. First being, I was a new kid, an outsider. Most of the kids in my class had known each other since kinder, preschool. I was coming in at the start of 4th grade. Next was that I was Asian. I was the only Asian kid in my class, and maybe one of 3 in my entire school, as a matter of fact. And to someone who had grown up in a completely Asian neighborhood, that's myself, suddenly seeing so many white people in one place was both jarring and lonely. This really awkward transition was compounded by my autism. Universal symptom or trait of all people with Asperger's is that we really, really, really like routine and sameness. And moving to a completely new neighborhood 40, 50 minutes away from my old home is obviously a disruption to that routine. And so we usually cope by throwing ourselves into a single, repetitive, safe, isolated activity. I chose to throw myself into books. During lunch and recess, as often as I could, I would run away and hide in the library. Outside of the library, my comfort zone, when faced with stress, instead of meltdowns, I would now have lockdowns. Basically, I'd curl myself into a ball, drop to the floor, and retreat into my own mind, isolating myself, both physically and mentally. I could go an entire day without opening my mouth once. And the kind of sad thing is I considered that this was a good thing. Or a day where I didn't talk to anybody. This was, of course, not very healthy for me. antisocial, lonely, depressed, but I had no idea how to change. Luckily, change found me. Toward the end of the year, I had found and made a genuine friend. I had friends before, people I talked to or hung out with. But this guy did something different. He was a tutor. He taught me all the social rules which had eluded me in the past. This was really something new. Previously, whenever it came to social rules or whatever, adults would be trying to teach me. They'd lecture me, put me in detention, send me to the office, call my mom, etc., etc. But Ricky, my friend, taught me as we went along. Hands-on experiences. For example, people with autism and Asperger's in general have this thing where they hyperfocus, where they get so absorbed into what they're doing that they ignore all outside distractions. Like, for example, the teacher calling my name for the past 2 minutes. He wasn't, my friend Ricky, he wasn't afraid to kick me to get my attention. He made me apologize when I goofed up socially, and his presence forced me to talk and socialize until I could do that stuff on my own. With his help, I opened up and expanded my social horizons. As 4th grade ended and 5th began, I slowly became better at talking to other people properly. I began to understand the rules of the game and began to play by them, thanks both in part to Ricky and other friends I made who were willing to tolerate my quirks. By the end of 5th grade, I actually occasionally felt comfortable in school. And as cliche as it sounds, I actually felt like I belonged. By 6th grade, I had more friends than I could, for the first time ever really, I had more friends than I could count on one hand. By 7th, I learned how to cope with things not going my way properly, not screaming and throwing around and running around. And by 8th grade, I learned how to use eye contact. And by 9th, I had went an entire year without being sent to the office for bad behavior. So, how did I get like this? I'm a far cry from the 1st grader who used to throw tantrums left and right. I can lose a pencil without going berserk. How did I go from a volatile little 7-year-old who would scream over an eraser to standing here in this room today? Honestly, there wasn't a single event that caused my transformation. It was gradual, took years, and a whole slew of people. My parents, my teachers, counselors, for what it was worth, they did not give up. I read books on autism with my mom. I tried strategies to keep my calm. I made myself feel sorry every time I went to the office, even though I might not have known what I was being called for. I always strove to change myself, to better function in a world I didn't, but would eventually come to understand. Be yourself, they say. And no, but because sometimes just being yourself isn't being the best self that you can be. I tried and was constantly trying to understand myself and others. It was a long journey, and I was hurt, and hurt a lot of others along the way. I kicked, I screamed, I cried, but I made it. I'm here, and I'm very glad that I got the chance to speak in front of you all today. Thank you.